Hi, Carla. It's Marianne Bland with Paxton Patterson. Thank you so much for meeting with me last month to discuss your plans for your early college pathway strong workforce plan. I think there's some very exciting ways to bridge connections for your ninth graders and then do what you are talking about as well with your eighth graders of utilizing the same labs and providing dual opportunities for students through the Paxton Patterson curriculum to connect the dots. I have prepared a presentation that I'm going to run through as quickly as possible for you here in this recorded video. Since I'm not sure exactly when your break is, I want you to be able to review this at your leisure. And then, of course, it would be great if we could circle back and discuss this and perhaps open that conversation up to additional site principles. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So here's our CTE Bridge Course proposal. The things that we discussed during our last chat were bridging the gap to the early college pathways, collaborating with your middle school partners, and increasing pathway completers. Now, the early college pathways you described to me are as follows. So you can see psychology, industrial automation, administration of justice, public health, and intro to health science careers. It's very exciting. You have a small cohort, of course, for your initial entries to these programs in terms of freshmen that will be accepted. And so one of the things we described was how can you best make sure those students know what they're getting into and that they are going to be a good fit for this. Part of the way to do that, of course, is to give them exposure to those particular job areas. So in terms of bridging the gap to the early college pathways, one way you could do that is to offer units within the CTE Bridge course for ninth graders that would introduce students to your early college themes. Since you could also offer this as part of that middle school summer program that I'll talk about more in a few slides, eighth graders could be introduced to that as well. So here you'll see just a brief connection between some of those in terms of available units that we offer that would help you to that end. Psychology, obviously mental health. You can see there's lots of choices for industrial automation such as CAD, digital manufacturing, robotics, and there are more. Administration of justice, you've got a couple of different choices there. Forensic science is one. Public health, one of the options is emergency and fire management services. And then intro to health science careers, there are many choices in that. And there's one that's just a straight up intro to health science careers unit that has a little bit of everything. Now, in terms of one of your additional goals of collaborating with your middle school partners, what I think is really exciting is that, of course, it's not an easy undertaking to get in touch with your middle school folks and deal with transportation and come up with the logistics side of all of this. But what we can do is basically make the same exact course units available to students. So here we see a lab. If this were a lab that were offered at one of the high school sites in the master's schedule for ninth graders as a CTE Bridge course, perhaps with CalPADS code 9236, which doesn't require a CTE credentialed instructor, might make it a little easier. You could have the same lab be available in the summer when the ninth graders are not there for your eighth graders as a career exploration camp. Now, to get into more detail about how that course would serve both the eighth graders and the ninth graders, these units are very short. So you're talking about designed for around 10 hours. In the context of a summer program, if you have students there for maybe a week or 2 weeks for a few hours a day, then chances are they could get through a couple, 2 to 3 units, depending on how quickly you go or if you skip some of the activities. And the units are not scaffolded, which means they can jump in and out at any time. It's not like a prereqs kind of thing, which makes it ideal for both 8th and 9th grade. There's broad career exposure. So each unit is exposing students to 6 to 12 unique careers. So for example, if I take digital manufacturing, it will let me know, hey, you could be a CNC operator, but you could also be a material scientist or a manufacturing engineer. There's lots of different ways that they can go. So within any unit that they take, whether they're in 8th grade or 9th grade, it's going to show them what those actual jobs are, how much they pay, where they can get the additional training, how much training is needed, who's hiring locally, and the growth potential for those careers. So it's great insight in concert with the hands-on opportunities for them to try those things. Student voice and choice is a big part of this because they can pick those things they're most interested in. So if you bring in this cohort of, say, 28 students in either the middle school summer program or in the 9th grade bridge course and say, okay, let's do a quick survey. Which of these areas do you most want to do? They're designed for students to work in teams of 2, so you can pair them up based on their interests and make sure that the things they're most excited about, they get a chance to do. Now, in terms of that equitable access from the 9th grade level, something we've done with districts nearby like Delano is have 2 labs at one campus because they were concerned about giving enough of their student body a chance to take that course. So if you had a 9th grade, enrollment size of maybe 300 students, for example, and you can only fit, 150 in here if you're offering 30 students in 5 sections, then maybe you do it in a semester length instead of a year-long course, and then you can have both halves of that 9th grade group take the class. Smart investment. So as I mentioned before, this is something that you can use for both groups. In terms of additional expenditures, really only looking at a little bit more for consumables. And most of our labs last a minimum of 5 years since updates to the curriculum are included. Now, in terms of what this summer career exploration camp might look like, I would definitely recommend that you join Brain Power with Diane Baeza. She did do something very similar in terms of a college boot camp program before, and I imagine she kind of has a blueprint that you can follow. Some of your considerations here, obviously transportation, how would kids get there? The teacher, so if you can contract the same teacher who would be teaching the CTE Bridge course, then we can use that same person for the 9th grade groups in the summertime as well. Or if there's somebody else you need trained, then we'll make sure that they're prepared as well. The same equipment and the same curriculum in the lab would be useful in the summertime. The same license would apply. Since it's a site license, there are no per student fees of any kind. The suitability for these different grade levels, obviously it's really just a summer that's separating our 8th graders who are incoming 9th graders from our 9th graders who have just arrived. So we've designed these units to be suitable for grades 6 through 9. And we've had both groups use them, so I wouldn't expect any issues with the appropriateness or the level of rigor for either 8th graders in the summertime or 9th graders in the regular school year. And so that content would still apply. Now, you guys have an amazing CCI district-wide, especially for such a large district, and that's why I'm completely honored to be even discussing being a part of that with you, although we are already a partner and work a lot with your ALTEDs and some of your comprehensive sites as part of this success. You have many, many schools that are in green and blue, which is awesome, and just a couple in yellow and orange. So overall, I think this is an effort that would be less of a, hey, let's make an impact on your CCI since it's already great, and more of a, how do we increase pathway completers by giving them context for those things they're choosing. Now, this is a lot to see, so I realize this may be tough to take in, but I'm going to break it down on additional slides. So basically, this is an initial crosswalk where I went and looked at all the pathways you have within your district within this center column. And on the right side is just identifying the industry sector into which those fall. On the left column, these are examples of units from Paxton Patterson that you could use in the CTE Bridge course that would make sure that there is a flow through and an introduction to all of those areas. So on the following slides, I'm going to quickly break down what those look like and what they're doing in there. Okay, so in terms of environment and ecology, which is part of agriculture and natural resources, some of what they're doing, as you can see here, are fast plants with organic and synthetic fertilizers, acid rain, soil pH, green waste, and of course, these are all leading into specific careers. They're all delivered within the context of careers. Veterinary medicine kind of straddles between ag and natural resources and health. There's CPR for animals. They learn about surgical packs, preventing disease transmission. Of course, there's microscope included. You're seeing a CPR dog there. They learn a little bit about animal x-ray and the cost of pet ownership, so just great practices. Video production is part of AME, so arts, media, and entertainment. And in here, they're working with an iPad. So all of these units can be accessed with our learning management system, which are Chromebooks, but some of them do require an iPad or a PC if they have any software or apps that are typically involved. And so in this case, since students are most comfortable with this, we used to include an iMac and now we include an iPad, or sorry, we do not include the iPad. We require an iPad since a lot of schools already have them. And That's, of course, going to be your initial introduction to video production. So rule of thirds, storyboards and scripts, editing techniques, camera and lighting. So you can see the lighting and equipment that's included with that here, as well as the green screen. And so as a reminder, we include not only the curriculum, but all of the physical components, tools, equipment, everything that's necessary to do these activities, which is part of the reason that people work with us, so that they don't have to build this from the ground up. It makes it much faster to implement once you've just decided philosophically this is something your district wants to do. Computer graphics and animation also dovetails into some of your available pathways, and they do stop motion animation in here. You can see they're working with clay for that particular activity. There's also things like, how do you create a story from start to finish? How are you delivering this information in an animated way, and why would you do that as opposed to, say, a live action? For construction, one of our most popular units is home maintenance fundamentals. And so this is kind of a little bit of everything. You can see students here are working on changing out a doorknob and deadbolts. They also learn how to use a lot of tools. So hammers, screwdrivers, levels. How do you tell where there's a stud, right? How do you hang a shelf? How do you repair drywall when you're done renting an apartment? You need to move out and get that security deposit back. So a lot of real world skills, but it also introduces students to careers related to this and lets them know that if they like working with their hands, they can make money in a lot of different great ways. Personal finance would be your intro to business and finance sector. And so this is a lot of that critical stuff. How does credit work, right? What's insurance? Why do I need it? How do I file taxes? And how do I keep track of income and make things work into the real world? Intro to Child Development is for education, child development, and family services. And there's basic things like swaddling, childhood safety, and CPR. But a lot of it is recognizing developmental disorders early on and how that factors into a lot of the child care education aspects of careers. Alternative energy is part of energy, environment, and utilities. And this is by far a super hands-on student favorite because they're doing things like creating energy from a hydrogen fuel cell car that you can see here. They also create electricity from wind by building a turbine with a turbine kit that we include. There's a solar panel that you can't really see in here, but they're doing experiments with that as well and learning more about sources of clean energy. So know that your region is really big on oil and gas. And of course, there are solar farms and wind farms as well. So the great job opportunities for students here from both the technical mechanical side of servicing and operating and installing that equipment, as well as designing ways for it to be more efficient in the future. So structural engineering still going on STEM in the energy and engineering and architecture sector. They're, of course, actually building beams and trusses and testing them in the structural stress analyzer that you see here. Design and marketing is part of fashion interior design. And this is going to start with the psychology of how their students are marketed to, help them understand some of those basic principles, but then also get more into the fun parts like sketching out and designing a fashion line. Intro to Health Science Careers is part of that health science and medical technology. And there are so many choices from us in terms of this particular industry sector, but this one is a great introduction because it's basics like checking vitals, using equipment, preventing disease. They're doing here a pipetting activity that is really fun. And then just understanding some of the ethics and ways that technology intersects with healthcare. Intro to Culinary Arts is another student favorite, surprise, because there's food. This has a lot of tools in it. So this is part of the physical assessments that I do of a space where I go and look at a classroom that might work for this to make sure there's storage and a sink and things like that. They do include a panini press, a blender, there's an induction cooktop. So they're going to learn how to do things like make scrambled eggs, avoid cross-contamination, not cut themselves when they're preparing food. And so, it's lots of different real world skills, but also how much does a chef make, right? Next is robotics. This is part of ICT, Information Communication Technologies. And this is coming with the Lego Mindstorm robots. And of course, it's some pretty basic programming of, how do optical sensors work and how do you get this robot you see here to do some basic tasks. So when you have higher end programs like that in the school, it's a great way to let students know if they do in fact want to go towards that pathway by trying it. You can also do Intro to Computer Science as part of ICT. And this is much more about the theories and the mathematical principles behind how computer science functions. So there's some basic programming, basic planning out of how an app would be designed, how does binary work, computational thinking, and so on. Materials processing and design is way more of the physical, real world, and the manufacturing and product development sector. So you can see here that they're actually making tools. So there are several tools included in this particular unit. We want them to learn about the safety principles, but then they're going to make stuff. So they make a tool. Employability skills applies to all industry sectors. And these are things like, how do you prepare your resume and your cover letter and interview properly? Emergency and fire management services is part of public services, and that's going to include some basics such as, CPR and using an AED, but it also gets into, what disasters affect that particular area, how can you be prepared for them, how are lands managed, and so it's an introduction to firefighting, but also other fields. Forensic science is one of the top 10 student favorites of all time. They solve a crime in here you see the student is using a ProScope, which is a digital mobile microscope used in the field by CSI folks. And so they get to do fingerprinting and look at, figure out who wrote the ransom note by looking at the chromatography of the ink under that microscope, as well as comparing soil samples taken from the scene. And then energy and power is our small engines unit. So this is a Briggs Stratton 4-stroke engine that students will disassemble and reassemble. They test and identify the internal engine components, valves, those kinds of things. So it's great for transportation, industry sector. And then it concludes with mousetrap racers, which is a ton of fun. So if this is something that makes sense for you guys, then just to give you an idea of how this would work out funding wise, the approximate investment is around $80,000 with what I've just shown you here, but you can change them out. You can shrink it down if you don't expect to have as high enrollment. Just in my experience with Kern High School District, you guys tend to have high enrollment at a lot of your sites. The consumables are in the second line here, and that's currently estimated around $1,200 a year. If you did have a lot of use in the summer, that'd probably go up by a couple hundred for your middle school integration. And then in terms of ongoing costs besides the consumables, every 5 years, you renew access to the site license for $2,800. Furniture is a consideration in terms of CTEG, which is what a lot of districts utilize for this, since that applies to grades 7 through 12. An allowable expenditure is industry-specific furniture. So some of these, like materials processing, really should have heavy duty kind of tables. And so if I'm looking at a classroom to put this in that only has little desks with the chairs attached to it, we would want to see if tables could be available. And if not, then I can make some industry specific furniture recommendations that would suit the physical space needed to do these, the structural integrity of some of the heavier duty components, and then also the storage, because there's going to be storage right nearby so students can access the materials they need on a regular basis, and then maybe some larger storage for the overage amounts. If you guys needed furniture, that usually runs about $20,000 to $25,000 per school. Now, I want to make sure it's clear what is included here, because we try to make these really comprehensive and easy to run. So all of the curriculum is integrated, as well as assessments. This will automatically grade checkpoint tests for teachers. And it has something called automatic remediation, which means it will kind of assess how a student is doing and then change their particular delivery of the practice questions or the tests to accommodate that. There's a color-coded concept mastery system, so they can see, red, yellow, green, have a quick idea of how they're doing from both the teacher perspective, the student perspective, or the parents if they want to jump in there. There are also rubrics. And so there's narrative and argumentative writing in each unit, and then rubrics. So for the hands-on activities, the teachers would use the rubrics and just go ahead and click them, 4, 3, 2, 1 on their side to assess students in that way. The learning management system is where this is all housed. So you would want to have a set of Chromebooks for each class, and then depending on the units that you pick, a couple of PCs or iPads to make sure it's all functional from the tech side, but then they just need internet access. For your middle school summer model, it might be a good idea, if you know that all of the students have internet access and tools at home, since they probably have been doing distance learning, to do a blended classroom model where they do kind of the reading and introductory parts, and then get there ready to dig into the hands-on activities so they can really make the most of their time in the lab, since they can do that from home. And then not the lab, the learning management system access and the reading parts. Tools and materials, of course, are included, as are the alignment of CTE standards, all of the tools and supplies that are needed for this are included by us. the setup. So we come and set these up, and then we support, it's ongoing support for your teachers. And then the training. So, professional development is included, and that's a big part of making sure this is successful. Any teachers that are excited about students being excited about learning or are really comfortable with project-based learning are typically a good fit. In terms of next steps and timeline, if in fact you guys are looking at CTIG 1920, my understanding is that those funds have to be spent by June 30th. And that typically means delivery of goods also needs to be done by June 30th. So right now we're looking at about a 4 to 8 week turnaround from purchase order to installation. Now that's for orders that come in over the next couple of months. If people are sending orders in June 15th and need them by June 30th, we could run into issues where we cannot deliver within that time frame, although I can do the best to prepare my warehouse if I know what people are planning to do. The breakdown of that is we got to figure out which schools want to participate. Then I would come down there and look at some classroom options. We can put these in portables, old science labs, we can convert shops. There's lots of choices, but we need to talk about things like how many sections will be in here? Will be a shared classroom that maybe math also has to happen, and those kinds of things. So I can make recommendations, and then I would design CAD layouts that the schools would know and approve, here's where everything's going to go. And our installers would also be the ones to utilize those when they come in and get things set up. We need to finalize the unit selection. So like I mentioned, I made an initial crosswalk, but there are other choices. We can talk about those. They're all super fun. And then we want to identify teachers, make sure that you're selecting people who are a good fit. Again, if you want to contract the same folks to do this in the summer as part of the middle school program, that's another consideration, as well as credentialing and things like that. Professional development, so we'll train them. Part of that is being done during the installations on site this year, and then we'll have regional sessions available as well. And then you'll have your students in labs. So if this is something that you want to use, CTIG 1924 with that June 30th expenditure, and make it available this summer as a middle school career exploration course, and then have it up and running in the fall for the 9th graders as that CTE Bridge, it's totally doable. So I appreciate you taking some time to watch this, and I hope that this has helped explain how this all might pan out. Let's set up a time and talk about it some more. Thanks, Carla. Hope you're doing well.